The moment you stop explaining is the moment they start listening. Let that sink in. Because the world doesn't ignore you because you're not loud enough. It ignores you because you give too much of yourself away. You chase. You beg. You over-explain, hoping they'll finally understand you, respect you, choose you. But here's the truth. The more you explain, the more you shrink. The more you chase, the more they run. And every time you beg, you abandon yourself. That's not strength. That's not power. That's survival mode. But the moment you go silent, not out of fear, but out of self-respect, you flip the script. Your silence becomes unsettling. Your absence becomes louder than any apology. And your stillness, it becomes your superpower. In this video, you're about to discover 6 hard truths why the Stoic never chases, never begs, never explains, and how your silence becomes the loudest voice in the room. This isn't just a message, it's a turning point. If you've ever been ignored, disrespected, misunderstood, this video is for you. And if you're ready to reclaim your dignity, protect your peace, and walk like a Stoic, let's begin. There's a quiet moment in every person's life when they realize, I was never chasing them. I was chasing validation I should have given myself. It's a painful truth to swallow, but let's be honest, how many times have you lowered your standards, stepped over your self-worth, and poured your heart out to someone who already made it clear they didn't care? You call, they ignore, you send another text, they ghost you. And instead of seeing it for what it is, emotional disinterest, you take it as a challenge. Maybe if I explain better, maybe if I show them I'm worth it. But that's not love. That's not self-respect. That's emotional desperation dressed up as loyalty. And here's the Stoic truth. The moment you chase, you place your peace in someone else's hands. And the moment you beg, you break the psychological boundary that protects your self-worth. Chasing is not strength. It's leakage. It leaks your energy. It leaks your dignity. It leaks the core of your emotional intelligence because you're reacting to someone who isn't even paying attention. Marcus Aurelius said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." Realize this, and you will find strength. When you chase people who dismiss you, you lose that power. You're not leading anymore. You're following them down into their emotional immaturity. And most of the time, they're not worth following. This isn't about bitterness. It's about boundaries. When you chase, you invert the power. Let's break down the psychological mechanism. The more effort you give someone who gives you less, the more they subconsciously value you less. It's not logical. It's behavioral. Humans are wired to assign worth to what they have to earn. When you over-explain, when you justify, when you beg, you remove the mystery. You give away your energy like it's free. And what's freely given, especially to the wrong people, is rarely respected. A Stoic doesn't operate this way. They don't beg to be seen. They don't chase to be chosen. They let their silence create the space where their value speaks louder than words. Your silence isn't rejection, it's realignment. One of the hardest pills to swallow is this: not everyone is meant to understand you. And some people were only ever in your life to trigger your awakening, not stay. Stoicism doesn't ask you to be cold. It asks you to be clear, and clarity means recognizing when a connection requires too much of you, too much explaining, too much proving, too much effort. It's no longer a connection. It's an emotional transaction. And guess what? If you have to fight to be understood, you're not with someone who's emotionally intelligent enough to understand you in the first place. So you stop chasing. Not because you don't care, but because you care enough about your inner peace to protect it. The psychological shift from chaser to centered. Think of your life like a kingdom. When you chase, you abandon the throne. You become a beggar at someone else's gate. But when you return to yourself, when you stay silent instead of reacting, when you observe instead of justifying, you reclaim your throne. And from that position, everything changes. You no longer feel the urge to prove your worth because you know it. You no longer need closure because your peace no longer depends on others' permission. You no longer respond to disrespect because your silence speaks louder than retaliation ever could. This is the beginning of your high-performance mindset. Because real power isn't found in how loudly you react. It's in how quietly you hold your ground. Final thought for Chapter 1. There will be moments when the urge to explain is overwhelming. When the silence feels too heavy, when you'll wonder if walking away was a mistake. But remember this, your peace is worth more than someone else's attention. Your silence is not a void, it's a boundary. And your decision not to chase might be the first act of true self-love you've made in years. So stop explaining, stop begging, stop chasing ghosts, and let your silence teach the lesson your words never could. There's something most people never admit. The need to explain yourself again and again is often just fear wearing a mask. Fear of being misunderstood. Fear of being rejected. Fear that your silence will be taken the wrong way. So you talk. You justify. You write paragraph after paragraph, hoping the right words will finally be heard. But here's the uncomfortable truth. The people who truly respect you don't need an explanation, and the ones who demand an explanation rarely deserve it. The Stoics understood this at a deep level. They weren't loud philosophers. They were masters of restraint. They understood that emotional intelligence isn't about how well you speak, it's about how deeply you choose your silence. Silence filters who's real. Let's go deeper. When someone misunderstands you, your instinct may be to fix it. You want to clear your name. Prove your intentions. Explain your perspective. But pause. Ask yourself, why do I need this person to understand me so badly? Is it for truth or is it for control? Because real self-worth doesn't crumble when someone gets you wrong. It doesn't panic at being misread. It calmly says, if you truly cared, you would have asked before you assumed. If you respected me, you wouldn't need a speech to recognize my character. That's inner clarity. And clarity is power. When you over-explain, you overexpose. Words can heal, but used carelessly. They can also become weapons, not just for others, but against yourself. Each time you explain yourself to someone who's already judged you, you expose another layer of your emotional core to someone who may not know how to handle it. Worse, to someone who may use it against you. In psychological terms, this is called overfunctioning. You become responsible for their perception. You work overtime to manage their feelings. You think, if I just say it right, they'll understand me better. But here's the harsh reality. You cannot convince someone to respect you if they're committed to misunderstanding you. And the more you try, the more you shrink. That's not emotional intelligence. That's emotional exhaustion. The Stoic strategy: detachment over explanation. Let's revisit the wisdom of Epictetus. Don't explain your philosophy. Embody it. This isn't just about abstract ideals. It's about your daily interactions. Instead of telling people who you are, you show it in your detachment, in your restraint, in your unbothered silence when they expect emotional chaos. And make no mistake, that silence will disturb them. Because when you don't defend yourself, when you don't fight for their validation, you break the illusion that they had power over your peace. Suddenly, they're forced to face themselves, their behavior, their assumptions, their guilt, and you. You walk away clean, not because you're heartless, but because you're disciplined. Your silence isn't emptiness, it's presence. It's easy to assume silence is passive, but true silence is one of the most active disciplines of the high-performance mindset. Think about it. It takes nothing to rant. It takes everything to remain grounded when your name is misunderstood, when your character is questioned, when your loyalty is taken for granted. But that silence, it's not absence, it's presence. It's the moment you stop negotiating your self-worth with people who don't value it. And here's where it gets powerful. The more silent you become, the more people start showing you who they really are. Because silence removes the distraction, it clears the noise. It reveals intentions. You don't have to test anyone. Just stop explaining and watch. The ones who truly respect you will step forward. The ones who only wanted your emotional performance will fade away. Final thought for Chapter 2. One day, you'll look back at all the times you over-explained and you'll feel a quiet regret. Not because you were wrong, but because you were trying to prove yourself to people who never earned the right to hear your truth. So from this moment forward, remember, let your silence speak what your dignity refuses to scream. Let your boundaries stand where your words no longer need to defend. Let your detachment be the lesson, not your justification. Because every time you choose not to explain, you train your emotional intelligence. You protect your inner peace. And you reinforce a truth that the Stoics lived by. You owe no explanation to people who weren't listening when you were speaking with your actions. Let that be your power. Let that be your edge. We've all been there. Left on red. Ghosted after giving your all. Cut off with no explanation. No closure. Just silence. And then it begins the spiraling. You write that long message. You reach out again. And again. You ask, "Can we talk?" You say, "I just need to understand." But here's the brutal truth. Chasing closure from someone who hurt you is often just another form of self-abandonment. Not because your pain isn't real, it is, but because the moment you beg for answers, you put your healing in the hands of the person who broke you. And that's not healing. That's a psychological trap. Closure is not a gift, it's a choice, you think. If they could just tell me why, I'd be free. But let's reframe that. If someone truly respected you, truly valued you, truly saw you, you wouldn't need to ask for closure. They would have given it effortlessly, out of basic decency. The fact that you're chasing clarity from someone who vanished, manipulated, or disrespected you, that says everything. The moment you go silent, you stop giving them the power to define your ending. Because here's the truth, no one tells you closure doesn't come from them. It comes from your decision to stop waiting for it. You don't need their words. You need your boundaries. You don't need their honesty. You need your self-honesty. Your need to explain is a trauma reflex. There's a reason you want to explain. It's not weakness, it's trauma. Somewhere along the line, you were conditioned to believe that being misunderstood is dangerous. Being left without answers means you did something wrong. You must fix it, or you're unworthy. So you overfunction. You over-justify. You try to wrap it up nicely so your nervous system can rest. But this is the Stoic truth. Peace doesn't come from tying emotional loose ends with people who cut the rope. It comes from accepting that not all wounds require conversation. Some just require distance. What really happens when you beg for closure? Let's break down the cycle. 1. They ghost, betray, or exit with emotional immaturity. 2. You seek clarity. 3. They respond with avoidance, gaslighting, or silence. 4. You feel humiliated, powerless, and stuck. Why? Because you handed your peace to someone who already proved they can't protect it. That's not resolution. That's emotional self-harm. What if you redefined closure as this? They showed me everything I needed to know in their silence. Now I walk away not because I'm okay, but because I choose to become okay without them. That's what emotional resilience looks like. Let their silence be your answer. It's easy to fall for the fantasy. If I just say this one last thing, if I could just make them understand, if I could just tell my side. But ask yourself, would you be talking to someone who's truly listening, or someone who's already decided their story, because you don't need to tell your side to someone who never asked? That one last message, it won't change them. It'll only drain you. You can't force clarity into chaos, and you can't demand respect from people who hide from accountability. Their lack of response is a response. Their silence is your sign. And your silence, that's your new boundary. Healing begins with self-respect, not explanation. Your mind may scream, say something, but your soul whispers, walk away quietly. Which one will you listen to? This is where inner peace begins, in that quiet, brave moment when you stop needing them to fix what they broke. When you realize you don't need to be understood by someone who never tried to know you. You don't need an ending scripted by someone who only showed up for the beginning. You don't need their words to validate your worth. Your actions will validate your healing. Real closure is this. Let's end this chapter with a radical truth. Real closure is a quiet decision. It's when you say, I saw the red flags. I stayed too long. But now I'm choosing myself, and I don't need you to agree with that choice. That moment, that stillness, is where your self-worth breathes again. So stop writing unsent paragraphs. Stop analyzing their last message. Stop asking why. Ask yourself instead, why do I think their clarity matters more than my peace? Then sit in silence. And let that silence become the space where your next chapter begins. One not written by them, but by you. In today's reactive world, silence is often mistaken for weakness. But if you study the greatest minds in Stoic philosophy, you'll find the opposite is true. Silence, when chosen consciously, is not a retreat, it's a form of power. A brutal, unshakable kind. Most people live in reaction. They are emotionally hijacked by every provocation. Someone says something offensive, they bite. Someone disrespects them, they lash out. Someone gives them the cold shoulder, they chase after closure. But the person who learns to pause, the person who chooses not to react, is no longer a puppet in other people's emotional theater. They become untouchable. The narcissist's favorite trap, your reaction. Let's go deeper. People who thrive on manipulation don't need you to agree with them. They don't even need you to love them. They just need you to react, to prove they still own a piece of your mind. A reaction. Any reaction means they still matter. It feeds their ego. It gives them relevance. It gives them power. So what happens when you don't react? What happens when you go silent? When you stop arguing? When you stop proving your point? They unravel. Your silence isn't a void, it's a mirror, and they cannot stand to see themselves reflected in it. Not reacting is not suppression, it's strategy. Let's be clear. Stoicism does not teach you to suppress your emotions. It teaches you to regulate them with precision. Not reacting doesn't mean you don't feel. It means you've trained yourself not to hand your emotions to people who haven't earned them. That's called psychological boundaries. It's saying, you don't get access to my nervous system just because you raised your voice. You don't get to drag me into chaos just because you're drowning in your own. That is spiritual discipline in motion. How the world misreads silence and why that's good. When you go quiet, people will say, you're being passive-aggressive. You don't care. You're cold. You've changed. Let them. Their discomfort with your boundaries is not your problem to solve. It's their emotional immaturity reacting to your evolution. You don't need to correct their misunderstanding. You don't need to soften your silence to be more palatable, because the moment you stop reacting, you stop dancing to their rhythm, and that's when your own music starts to play. Your silence becomes your shield and your signal to the wrong people. It confuses. To the right people, it commands respect. In a noisy world, discipline is rare and magnetic. Most people overshare. They argue on impulse. They post every emotion. They explain every step. But you're becoming different. You're choosing restraint. You're mastering timing. You're learning that just because you're provoked doesn't mean you're obligated to respond. This is the root of the high-performance mindset: clarity over chaos, poise over panic, precision over performance. You become magnetic, not by saying more but by meaning more when you do speak. True power is non-reactive presence. Think of the strongest people you know, not the loudest, not the flashiest, the strongest. They speak slowly. They listen more than they talk. They observe. They wait. And when they speak, their words land because they weren't said impulsively. They were forged in discipline. You can become that. You don't need to win the argument. You don't need to send that last message. You don't need to correct the lies. You win when your inner peace becomes more valuable than your need to be right. The practice how to train the art of not reacting. 1. Breathe before you speak. That pause is the difference between control and chaos. 2. Notice your triggers. Write them down. Study them. Train through them. Your triggers are not weaknesses, they're training grounds. 3. Let others talk. Let them feel clever. Let them assume. Your silence is not submission, it's elevation. 4. Replace. I'll show them with. I'll outgrow them. This is how warriors think. Quiet. Strategic. Patient. Final thought for Chapter 4. They may expect you to react. They may want you to lose your cool. They may bait you with words. Guilt or silence. Let them try. But you remain still, because you're no longer the person who reacts out of insecurity. You're becoming the one who watches, calculates, and then chooses with emotional intelligence, with spiritual control, with a mindset that only plays long games. You don't just hold silence. You become silence. And that silence, that's what keeps your power, while the noise consumes them. You think silence is the end. To them, it's the beginning of something they never expected: a confrontation with themselves. Because here's what most people won't admit. It's not your absence that haunts them. It's the echo of who they were when they had access to you. When you were there, they could dodge accountability. They could blame you, deflect, manipulate, distract. But the moment you go silent, there's no one left to play the game with. And now, they're stuck in a room full of their own reflection. And it's louder than anything you could have ever said. Silence triggers what words cannot. You could have yelled. You could have explained. You could have exposed every lie. But none of that would have pierced their ego. Silence does. Because silence is clean. It doesn't beg. It doesn't defend. It doesn't stoop. And when you offer no reaction, no permission slip for more chaos, you force them to sit with what they've done. This is emotional intelligence at its peak, knowing that sometimes the most devastating mirror is the one you never hold up, you just become it. Your disappearance isn't rejection, it's a revelation. They thought you'd come back. They thought you'd break first. They thought your self-worth was something they could regulate. And now they're haunted by the quiet fact that you didn't just leave. You elevated. Without fanfare, without revenge, without making a scene, because your healing wasn't about them. It was about finally seeing yourself as someone you wouldn't betray anymore. And that realization, it's what haunts them the most. They fumbled someone who would have walked through fire for them, and now that fire is no longer theirs to feel. Projection, their guilt in disguise. Here's the twisted part. Once you go silent, they may start painting you as the villain. You just abandoned me. You never really cared. You think you're better now. Don't fall for it. This is psychological projection in full force, because deep down, they know what they did. They just can't admit it, not to you, not to anyone, not even to themselves. So instead, they project guilt as anger, shame as silence, regret as resentment. But you don't bite. You don't correct the narrative, because your job isn't to rewrite their story. It's to write your own. When the power dynamic flips, you used to seek validation. You used to over-explain. You used to wonder what you did wrong. Now you've stopped seeking. You've started seeing. You've seen the pattern. You've seen how you shrink yourself to be palatable. You've seen how your light makes some people uncomfortable because they can't control what they can't manipulate. And the moment you stopped needing them, they started needing you. Not because they love you, but because they lost control over the version of you they could use. The greatest haunting is regret they can't escape. People don't always regret losing you immediately. They regret losing access to the benefits of having you, your loyalty, your consistency, your emotional labor, your energy, your presence. And by the time they realize it, you've grown too much to shrink back down. You don't even fit in their version of the story anymore. And that disconnect, it becomes their spiritual punishment. Because nothing haunts the ego more than realizing I had something rare, and I lost it trying to prove I didn't need it. Your silence is the wake-up call their soul didn't expect. We often want justice, to be heard, to be validated. But the Stoic path teaches us this. There is no greater justice than peace, and no louder justice than silence. Because when you walk away quietly, when you rebuild without announcing your comeback, when your presence is replaced by your progress, they feel it. Even if they never say it. Even if they pretend they're fine. Even if they find someone new. Trust this. Their soul knows what they lost. And your silence is the proof. It was never yours to chase. It was always theirs to lose. Here's a harsh truth. No one tells you. Most people don't return because they miss you. They return because they miss the control they had over you. They don't come back because they've evolved. They come back because you have. They sense that something has shifted. You're no longer waiting. You're no longer explaining. You're no longer emotionally available in the way they're used to. And that's what draws them in. The real motivation behind I miss you, they'll say they miss your energy, your warmth, your loyalty, your laughter. But what they really miss is the version of you who tolerated their inconsistency, who forgave too quickly, who explained yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. Now that version of you is gone. And they can feel it even from a distance. What they miss isn't your presence. It's their power over your peace. Why narcissists circle back the hoovering tactic? This isn't just emotional nostalgia, it's psychological strategy. There's a pattern called hoovering, like a vacuum. They try to suck you back in, not to reconnect, but to reclaim control. You'll hear things like, "I've changed. No one gets me like you. I've been thinking about you a lot lately. Let's catch up." Just as friends. But the timing always aligns with one thing: your silence, your glow-up, your elevation. They see you moving on, and it threatens their ego. So they reach back, not to honor your worth, but to see if they still own a piece of it. Emotional intelligence teaches us you can forgive someone without opening the door for them again. Discernment is the discipline of the evolved. This is where spiritual discernment comes in. When someone returns, don't just ask, "Do I still care?" Ask, "What pattern is trying to repeat here?" Because life has a strange way of testing you. It sends the same energy back in a different outfit to see if you've really changed. You don't owe anyone a re-entry pass just because they remembered your worth too late. You're not a museum. Your value isn't up for public viewing after they walked out. How to handle their return with quiet power. 1. Observe. Don't absorb. Their words may sound sincere, but sincerity without changed behavior is just manipulation with better branding. 2. Let your silence speak louder than their apology. You've evolved. You've healed. You don't owe a performance. 3. Don't correct their memory. Let them romanticize the past if they need to. That's not your burden. Truth doesn't need defending. 4. Don't confuse loneliness with love. Just because someone comes back during your quiet season doesn't mean they're meant to walk with you in your growth season. Your new standard isn't bitterness, it's clarity. It's not revenge, it's wisdom. The test of growth is who you no longer entertain. The ultimate proof that you've grown. You no longer seek closure from people who gave you chaos. You no longer entertain small minds just because they once had access to your big heart. You no longer break your boundaries for people who never respected them. This is the high-performance mindset. Your energy is your currency. You spend it wisely now. You invest it in peace, purpose, and people who reflect your new level, not your old wounds. Not every return deserves a reopening. They may show up with flowers, with apologies, with memories. But remember, what's familiar isn't always healthy, and what's returned doesn't always belong. You didn't go silent to punish them. You went silent to protect yourself, to listen to your own voice for once, to rebuild your identity outside of who they told you to be. And now that you've built peace, don't trade it for temporary comfort. Final reflection for Chapter 6. When they return, stay calm, stay grounded, smile if you want, say nothing if you prefer. You don't owe a drama. You don't owe closure. You don't owe access. Your power is no longer in being chosen. Your power is in knowing you no longer need to be, because you've already chosen yourself. And once you do that, no return, no apology, no performance can ever shake the foundation of who you've become in silence. They act like they've moved on, like your presence meant nothing, like your absence changed nothing. But behind that performance, they're watching closely, quietly, because silence doesn't mean indifference. It often means obsession, especially when it comes from those who once had access to your soul. The illusion of "I don't care," they block you. Then, check your new account. They avoid eye contact. Then ask mutual friends how you're doing. They post loud affirmations, but stalk your quiet progress. Why? Because it's easier to fake apathy than to face regret. You weren't just someone they knew. You were a mirror, and when you left, they lost the only reflection that showed them where they truly stood. And now, the silence is deafening. Why they can't let go even if you did. Let's be real. You let go because you had to, because peace required it, because healing demanded it. But they never really let go. They only replaced, distracted, projected, because in their mind, letting go would mean admitting they were wrong, that they sabotaged something sacred, that their ego cost them someone irreplaceable. And for people ruled by ego, accountability feels like death. So they watch instead, silently, obsessively. Your glow-up feels like punishment to them every time you rise. They flinch, not outwardly, but internally. When you speak with confidence, It reminds them of how they silenced you. When you laugh in peace, it echoes the joy they once stole. When you move on without them, it confirms what they feared the most, that they never broke you. They just delayed your breakthrough. Your evolution isn't just growth to them. It's revenge, not because you tried to hurt them, but because you dared to heal without needing them to understand. Spiritual discipline, why you don't respond. It's tempting to clap back, to let them know you see them watching, to throw a subtle message into your story. But true power doesn't perform. Spiritual discipline means you don't disturb your peace to prove a point. You don't lower your vibration just to validate your progress. You don't need to scream your transformation. The results are loud enough. And trust me, they hear every step. Not because you're chasing them, but because they can't stop chasing the version of you they can no longer reach. You became the unreachable standard. They may find someone new, flaunt a new connection, play pretend, but deep down, they know there's a standard now, and they set it by losing you. They may try to recreate the bond, but what you gave was real, rare, rooted in emotional intelligence and unfiltered love. That's not something you replace. That's something you remember forever. And every person they meet after you becomes a painful comparison. Not because you were perfect, but because you were present, fully, authentically, fearlessly. The haunting they'll never speak of here's what they'll never admit. You made them feel safe in ways they didn't even understand. You gave grace they didn't deserve. You loved them in their most unlovable moments. And now, they have to live with the fact that they lost all of that, not because you changed, but because you finally stopped accepting less. That's what haunts them, not your absence, but the truth that your absence was their own doing. Final reflection for Chapter 7. They won't say your name. They won't like your post. They won't reach out. But they watch. They remember. They ache. And you don't need to perform. You don't need to update them. You don't need to win loudly. Because the real victory is this: your silence has become the one thing they can't silence. And your peace. It's the loudest message they'll ever hear. You want to know what drives manipulators insane, what keeps toxic people up at night. It's not your anger. It's not your confrontation. It's not even your goodbye. It's your silence. Because silence removes the one thing they crave the most: control. Control needs reaction. Think about it. The toxic thrive on emotional responses. They poke, they prod, they bait. They say things not to connect, but to trigger. Not to understand, but to dominate. And every time you explain, justify, or react, you hand them a little more control. But when you go silent, the game ends. Their hooks fall flat. Their manipulations dissolve into the void, because control can't survive where there's no reaction. And silence. Silence is non-reaction in its purest form. Why silence feels like punishment to them. To someone who's used to controlling the narrative, your silence is terrifying. It creates a vacuum, and vacuums force reflection. Suddenly, they're not in charge of how the story ends. They're not able to twist your words. They're left alone with their own behavior. And for people who never take accountability, that silence becomes a mirror. They can't escape. Why didn't they fight back? Why didn't they respond? Why are they not chasing these questions? Eat them alive. Because they no longer control the emotional rhythm. You do. And you're not playing anymore. Silence makes you an enigma. When you stop explaining yourself, you become unpredictable. They don't know what you're thinking. They don't know what you're planning. They don't know where you stand. And that drives them mad, because manipulators need certainty. It's how they strategize. They need emotional data from you to know which button to push next. But when you go silent, you cut off the supply line. You make your energy unavailable. You become a closed system. And nothing disarms manipulation faster than mystery. Emotional intelligence equals not taking the bait. The more emotionally intelligent you become, the less you feel the need to prove yourself. You realize that your peace is sacred, that arguing with ignorance is draining, that teaching someone to value you is not your job. So you stop. You don't ghost them in revenge. You disconnect in wisdom. You don't block them to hurt them. You disappear to protect your sanity. And that kind of silence, it's not punishment, it's preservation. You've trained yourself not to react. This silence doesn't happen overnight. It comes from inner discipline, from spiritual restraint, from thousands of moments where you wanted to lash out, but chose self-mastery instead. You've trained yourself to feel everything but act on nothing, to process in private what others broadcast in chaos, to walk away with dignity when screaming seemed justified. That's not weakness, that's elite control. And that kind of control, it rattles every person who used to benefit from your chaos. What they lost wasn't just you, it was access. The moment you go silent, they don't just lose your voice. They lose your time, your energy, your validation, your softness. And they realize, too late, that access to your world wasn't a right, it was a privilege. You were the calm in their storm. Now they're left with just the storm. No one prepared them for that. Final reflection for Chapter 8. There's a shift that happens when you stop reacting. You no longer need to prove your worth to people who diminish it. You no longer chase conversations that only lead to confusion. You no longer get pulled into battles where the outcome is already rigged. You simply go silent, not as a weapon, but as a boundary, because your silence isn't just absence, it's presence redefined. Its control reclaimed, its power matured, and those who lost control over you, they don't fear your words anymore. They fear the person you've become without them. Let's tell the truth that few are brave enough to say closure isn't something they give you. It's something you create when you finally stop waiting for it. Most people stay trapped in emotional purgatory, replaying conversations that never happened, chasing explanations they'll never get, hoping that one day the person who hurt them will magically wake up and say, "You were right. I'm sorry. You didn't deserve that." But here's the brutal truth. If they were capable of giving you closure, they wouldn't have hurt you that way in the first place. Closure is a myth they sell you to keep you hooked. Toxic people love to leave doors open. They ghost you, then text you months later. They disrespect you, then act confused when you pull away. They sabotage the connection and still imply you owe them a conversation. Why? Because if you're still explaining, still seeking resolution, still waiting for one last talk, you're not moving on, you're circling. and they know it. It's a power game, but once you see through the illusion, everything changes. You close the chapter by refusing to reopen it. You don't need to unearth every misunderstanding. You don't need to make them see the damage. You don't need to drag clarity out of people committed to confusion. What you need is finality, not from their words, but from your decision. Closure is not about fixing what they broke. It's about refusing to let broken people decide your worth. You don't heal by getting the perfect ending. You heal by giving yourself permission to walk away without one. You stop needing their why. You will never get an answer that makes betrayal okay. You will never hear a justification that erases the pain. You will never understand how someone could love you on Monday and destroy you by Friday. And that's fine. Because healing isn't about making sense of their chaos. It's about making peace with your own truth. You were real. You gave fully. You showed up with love, integrity, and presence. That's all the closure you'll ever need. The most powerful words are the ones never said. They expect you to chase, to break your silence, to come crawling back for a goodbye. But you don't. And in doing so, you write the final sentence without even speaking. This chapter ends here, not because you said so, but because I no longer need you to. No doors slammed, no dramatic send-off, just stillness, and then distance. That's closure. That's emotional intelligence in motion. You become unreachable in spirit, not just proximity. Anyone can block a number. Anyone can move cities. But true closure, it happens when their opinion no longer holds power over your peace, when their absence no longer leaves a hole, when your value is no longer up for debate. That's when you stop needing closure, because you've become whole by yourself. A Stoic's closure is found in inner peace. Stoicism teaches us that what matters most is not what others do, but how we respond. You didn't get the apology. You didn't get the explanation. You didn't get the justice. And yet, you still chose peace. You still chose silence. You still chose you. That is the highest form of closure, because no closure is louder than calm. No revenge is sweeter than clarity, and no final word is more powerful than your quiet, unapologetic exit. Final reflection for Chapter 9. Stop waiting for the person who broke you to fix it. Stop expecting truth from someone who lies to themselves. Stop needing closure from someone who couldn't even give you consistency. You don't need it, because you are the closure. You are the full stop. You are the clean ending in a world that loves to leave things messy. Walk away, head held high. No final words. No need to be understood. Just peace, undeniable, unshakable peace. That's how a Stoic closes the door and never looks back. They may keep waiting for you to explain. They may keep spinning the story, hoping to provoke you. They may even pretend they've moved on while secretly watching everything you do. But none of that matters anymore, because now you understand. Your silence is not the absence of a response. It is the response, and it's the loudest one you'll ever give. No more explaining. No more defending. No more justifying. The old version of you used to beg for clarity. You used to write long texts hoping they'd finally get it. You used to believe that if you just explained it better, they'd treat you better, but not anymore. Now, you realize that people who want to understand will, and those who don't, won't, no matter how well you speak. Some people are committed to misunderstanding you, so you stop wasting your breath. Silence becomes your boundary, not because you're afraid to speak, but because they no longer deserve your voice. You no longer fight to be seen. You used to shrink yourself for their comfort. You dimmed your light so they wouldn't feel insecure. You kept showing up for people who wouldn't even clap when you won. That version of you is gone, because now, you see, you are not hard to love. You were just offering your love to people who couldn't receive it. You no longer chase validation from the emotionally unavailable. You no longer pour into people who drain you dry. You don't need to convince anyone of your worth anymore, because you've remembered who you are. And that remembering, that quiet, sacred knowing is your power. Silence is not weakness, it's mastery. There's a difference between being silent because you're afraid and being silent because you've evolved beyond the need to speak. This kind of silence, it's forged in fire. It says, I know who I am now. It says, I don't fight battles I've already won internally. It says, if peace costs me a conversation, I'll pay it every time. It's not the silence of avoidance. It's the silence of someone who no longer needs noise to feel powerful. That's not silence out of fear. That's silence out of freedom. They can't reach you anymore. Let them talk. Let them twist the truth. Let them seek attention from anyone who will listen. It doesn't matter, because you're gone, not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually, energetically. You've elevated to a level where their words can't wound, and their games can't touch. They lost access not just to your presence, but to your reaction. Your light, your energy. They're left shouting into a void. You're walking in silence, surrounded by peace. That's the final answer. You became the lesson. In the end, it wasn't your argument that taught them. It wasn't your revenge. It wasn't your dramatic exit. It was the stillness. It was your ability to leave, to stay gone, and to never look back. Because that kind of silence doesn't just end the conversation, it ends the cycle. And that's what haunts them. Not your words, not your anger, but the fact that you outgrew the chaos they depended on. You healed. You rose. You became untouchable. Final reflection for Chapter 10. You don't owe them a final message. You don't owe them a dramatic closure. You don't owe them anything at all. What you owe is to yourself, your peace, your future, your wholeness. And when you choose those things above all else, your silence becomes your superpower. Your absence becomes your loudest presence. And your self-worth speaks volumes even when you don't say a word. Because in a world addicted to noise, the one who walks in quiet power always wins. They thought your silence meant defeat. They had no idea. It was your awakening. You didn't disappear. You ascended. Because here's what they never understood. A person who no longer needs to explain is a person who's finally in control. A person who no longer reacts is a person who's mastered themselves. And a person who can walk away without a word has already won. This isn't about ego, it's about elevation. It's about emotional intelligence. It's about spiritual discipline. And most of all, it's about self-worth that no longer negotiates with chaos. You don't owe the world your explanations. You owe yourself peace. You owe yourself clarity. You owe yourself a life where your energy is protected and your silence is respected. Let this video be the turning point. The moment you stop overgiving, the moment you stop chasing people who were never meant to go where you're headed, the moment you stop explaining storms to those who built shelters from blame, because from this moment on, you speak through action. You move with quiet confidence, and you let the world feel your absence just enough to remember your value. So if this message stirred something in your soul, if you know you're done explaining, done chasing, done shrinking, drop this in the comments. My silence is no longer an apology. It is my power, my boundary, and my peace. Share this video with someone who's been giving too much of themselves to people who never deserved it. Subscribe now for weekly reminders to stay grounded, stay clear, and stay unshakably stoic. This is Think Stoic 101, where silence isn't avoidance, it's wisdom in motion. And this is just the beginning.